There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a man when he realizes he has been misread his entire life and has let it happen on purpose. I have lived in that silence for 43 years. I built my life inside of it, deliberately, the way you build a house from the foundation up, one decision at a time, in the dark, before anyone else is awake. My name is Leonard Voss. I am 67 years old. I drive a 1999 Ford F-150 that my daughter Iris has been trying to replace for the better part of 4 years. It is green, or it was green once. Now it is the color that happens when a truck has spent 2 decades parked under a walnut tree and has developed its own opinion about aesthetics. The passenger door requires a specific technique to open that I have never once bothered to explain to anyone who didn't already know it. My neighbor across the street, a retired school teacher named Bud Kaminsky, once watched me climb out of that truck on a Saturday morning and shook his head slowly. "Leonard," he said, "you are the only man I know who could afford to drive anything on this earth and chooses that." I told him I liked the legroom. He walked back inside. Here is what Bud Kaminsky does not know. What the woman at the hardware store who always calls me Han does not know. What the young man at the bank branch who once gently suggested I look into some of our financial planning options did not know when I smiled and told him I was doing just fine. I own Voss Capital Group, real estate development, commercial lending, a hospitality division with properties across 11 states, and a construction subsidiary that has built more square footage in the Southeast than most people will ever walk through in a lifetime. It is structured quietly, deliberately, through a series of holding companies that keep my name in the middle of things and out of the front of them at the same time. No magazine profiles, no charity galas with my name on a placard, no Forbes list. I built it that way because I watched my father lose everything trying to look like he had it, and I decided before I was 30 years old that I would rather be the man nobody sees coming. Voss Capital Group is worth somewhere north of $2 billion. I drive a truck with a sticky passenger door and a defroster that works on its own schedule, and I would not change a single thing. Now let me tell you about my daughter. Iris Voss Callahan is 36 years old, and she has been the clearest thinking in my life since the day she was born. She has her mother's eyes and her grandfather's stubbornness, and a laugh that sneaks up on a room before anyone realizes it's arrived. When she was 9 years old, she convinced me to let her stay up past midnight on New Year's Eve by presenting a written argument, 2 pages, handwritten, citing the developmental benefits of milestone experiences. I read it twice. I couldn't find a hole in it. She has been like that ever since. I did not anticipate who she was going to marry. 2.5 years ago, Iris brought home a man named Fletcher Callahan. I want to be fair about Fletcher. I want to be the kind of father who gives a man his full and honest due. So let me say this as carefully as I can. Fletcher Callahan is the kind of man who treats every room like an audition he has already been told he's going to pass. He is 41 years old, good-looking, broad-shouldered, the kind of face that photographs well and knows it. He has the handshake of a man who read somewhere that a firm handshake communicates strength and has been performing it ever since. Within 20 minutes of meeting me, he had mentioned his bonus structure, the square footage of the house he was under contract on, and the fact that he had recently been promoted to Regional Vice President of Development at a company called Meridian Property Partners. Meridian Property Partners. Here is where the story becomes interesting, and I need you to stay with me, because this is the part that matters. Meridian Property Partners is a subsidiary of Voss Capital Group. It has been for 11 years. Fletcher Callahan did not know this. Iris did not know this. The recruitment process that brought Fletcher into the company 14 months before he met my daughter was a standard competitive search, clean from the outside, executive firm, multiple rounds, background checks, compensation review. What no one knew was that I reviewed every candidate personally before the final round, the way I do for every senior hire across every company I own. I read Fletcher's file, I evaluated his numbers, I approved his offer letter, and then I went home, changed into my yard clothes, and spent the afternoon clearing brush from the back fence line. Fletcher Callahan got his promotion inside my company. He texted Iris that evening. She called me, warm and bright. "Dad, Fletcher just made regional VP. Isn't that amazing?" "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said. "He must have worked hard for it." Then I put the phone down and watched the college football game. In the beginning, I gave Fletcher Callahan a genuine chance. I am not a man who closes the door on people early. I have spent 40 years hiring and managing human beings in enough volume to know that first impressions are incomplete. People grow into things. People reveal better versions of themselves when the pressure is right. I have been surprised before, pleasantly. Fletcher did not surprise me pleasantly. What he did instead was show me, in increments, exactly who he was beneath the handshake and the square footage. It started small. A comment at Sunday dinner about how Iris's income didn't really need to be that ambitious now that they were a household. A moment at a backyard cookout where he talked over her twice in the same story. Little things. The kind of things you could explain away once or twice, but that add up after a while into something you can no longer ignore. Then came the evening at the Meridian Regional Conference. I had attended as a background observer, the way I occasionally do, quiet presence, unremarkable, the older man in the corner who nobody places. Fletcher was presenting to a room of 40 people, and he was good at it, I'll give him that. After the session, I was introduced by someone on the hosting committee as Iris's father. Fletcher looked at me for just a moment with the look of a man recalculating what this particular introduction required of him, and then said warmly, for the benefit of the room, "Absolutely. Great to have you, Leonard. These things can be a lot to follow if you're not in the industry." I smiled. I nodded. I moved along. I filed it away. But the moment that changed everything happened on a Wednesday afternoon about 5 months ago. I was in the Meridian offices handling something through one of my holding company representatives. The way I periodically do, quiet, unremarkable, the kind of presence that gets signed in at the front desk and forgotten. I was waiting near the elevator bank on the executive floor when I heard Fletcher's voice coming from down the corridor. He was talking to someone, another VP by the sound of it, relaxed, slightly lowered but not lowered enough. "Iris's dad?" Fletcher was saying, and I could hear the easy amusement in his voice. "Oh, he's a sweetheart, old-timer. Retired, I think, or close enough. Spent his whole life doing construction work or something, some kind of small contractor. Drives this truck that, honestly, I don't know how it's still running." He laughed, and the other person laughed with him. Iris feels like she needs to include him in everything, which, it's a lot sometimes. But he's harmless. Honestly, I feel a little bad for the guy. Sweet old man. Just kind of drifted into whatever his life became. I stood very still for a moment, drifted into whatever his life became. I straightened my jacket and walked back toward the elevator. I did not say anything to anyone. I rode down to the lobby, signed out, got in the F-150, and sat in the parking structure for about 3 minutes with the engine off. Then I started it up and drove home. I want to be honest with you about something. I have been underestimated my entire adult life, and for most of that time I have found it useful. Useful is not the same as painless. There is a difference between choosing to be invisible and being erased. I had chosen every version of this. The truck, the yard work, the hardware store, the nods and the smiles and the "that's wonderful, son." I had chosen all of it. But there is a particular quality to being dismissed by someone who is standing inside the thing you built, and that quality is something I sat with for a long time. My father used to say, "Leonard, you don't correct a man's math while he's still adding. You wait until the total is wrong, and then you show him the whole page." I waited. The invitation came on a Sunday morning. Iris called, a little nervous underneath the cheerfulness, the way she sounds when she wants something to go well and isn't entirely sure it will. Fletcher's parents, a couple named Douglas and Beverly Callahan, were hosting a dinner at their home in Buckhead. Douglas was a retired corporate attorney. Beverly was, by all available evidence, a woman whose primary occupation was the curation of other people's impressions of her. They wanted to do a proper family dinner, all together, get to know each other, make it official. "Dad, I really want this to go well," Iris said. "They're a little formal, but they're good people. Just, themselves." "I'll be there, sweetheart," I said. "I'm looking forward to it." That was true. I was. Fletcher called me the following Tuesday. He called directly, which was already unusual enough to register. He was warm, casual, the specific kind of warm and casual that people deploy when they are about to say something they have already decided to say but want to cushion first. "Hey, Leonard. So I just wanted to give you a little heads up about Saturday. Douglas and Beverly, they're pretty traditional, big on presentation, you know how some people are. So if you wanted to maybe, I don't know, dress things up a little. Nothing crazy. Just, something a bit more pulled together than usual." There was a pause. "Fletcher," I said pleasantly, "I appreciate you thinking of that." Of course, he said, relieved. "Just want everyone to be comfortable. It's a nice house, formal dining, the whole thing. I understand, I said. I'll see you Saturday. I hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a moment, looking at the window above the sink that looks out onto the backyard. Then I went upstairs, opened my closet, and moved past the suits in the back, the charcoal ones, the slate blue one I wore when Voss Capital closed its first nine-figure deal, moved past all of it. And I pulled out my cleanest, most ordinary clothes. Pressed khakis, a simple collared shirt, gray, the everyday shoes, scuffed at the toe, clean but not new. I laid them out for Saturday. Then I went out to the driveway and patted the roof of the F-150 once, the way you touch the shoulder of someone you are glad to have with you. We've got a dinner, I thought. Dress code is invisible. We've been doing that our whole lives. Because here is what Fletcher Callahan did not understand. Here is what Douglas and Beverly Callahan, sitting in their house in Buckhead, preparing a formal dining room, did not understand. I was not dressing down because I lacked options. I was dressing down because I wanted to see, clearly and without any interference, exactly who these people were when they believed nothing was at stake. I had a feeling they were about to show me everything. Saturday arrived the way days like that always do, quietly, without announcing itself, as if it had no particular opinion about what it was about to become. I woke at 5:30, made coffee the way I always make it, black, nothing added, the same way my father made it, and his father before him. I sat at the kitchen table by the window and watched the morning come in gray and slow over the yard. The oak tree in the back was losing its last leaves. The bird feeder needed refilling. I made a note to do it when I got home. I dressed slowly, the gray shirt pressed, the khakis crisp, the everyday shoes. I looked in the mirror in the hallway for a moment. That's right, I thought. Then I went out to the truck. The F-150 sat in the morning driveway, green and unhurried, morning light catching the long scratch along the driver's side panel that I have never bothered to have repaired. I got in. The engine turned over with its familiar complaint, that low rattling consideration it goes through every time before deciding, yes, all right, let's go. Then it settled into its idle. I drove to Buckhead. The Callahan house sat at the end of a long driveway behind a wrought iron gate that opened on a code. There were professionally maintained boxwood hedges on both sides and uplighting on the facade that I recognized as the kind of lighting a specific firm out of Midtown Atlanta installs, because I have used them on 3 commercial properties and know exactly what their minimums run. The house itself was large in the way that communicates effort rather than inheritance. They had acquired this and made sure you knew it. A young man was stationed near the front entrance to receive cars. He looked at the F-150 with the expression of a person running a calculation they did not ask to run. He recovered quickly. "Good evening, sir," he said. "I can take your keys." "She pulls left at low speed," I said, handing them over. "Just keep that in mind." He nodded with the focused expression of someone who has decided not to have any further feelings about the vehicle he is now responsible for. I straightened my shirt and walked to the front door. Douglas Callahan opened it before I knocked. He was a tall man, 70 or so, silver-haired, the kind of physical presence that had probably commanded courtrooms and now commanded dinner parties with equal confidence. He was dressed in expensive casual, which is the specific category of clothing that costs more than formal wear while pretending not to. His smile was assembled and warm, and arrived a half-second after he registered what I was wearing. "Leonard," he said, extending a hand. "Glad you could make it. Come in, come in." His handshake was the handshake of a man who taught his son everything he knew about handshakes. The house was everything the driveway had promised. High ceilings, art on the walls that had been chosen for what it communicated rather than what it meant. A staircase in the entry hall, with the quiet self-confidence of a staircase that knows it is being admired. Every surface said the same thing. "We arrived here. This is what our life looks like. We would like you to feel the distance between your life and ours, just slightly, just enough." Beverly Callahan appeared from the direction of what I assumed was the living room. She was elegant in the precise, assembled way of women who have made elegance their project. Her jewelry was the kind of jewelry that is designed to appear understated while being neither. She took both my hands in hers, the way people do when they want warmth and sincerity to arrive at the same time, and have learned that both hands helps. "Leonard," she said, "we have heard so many wonderful things. You are just as darling as Iris described." Darling. Not impressive, not accomplished, not interesting. Darling. The word you use for children and golden retrievers and elderly men who look a little lost. Beverly, I said warmly, your home is beautiful. She smiled the smile of a woman for whom that sentence was the correct beginning. Iris appeared across the room and crossed to me, and I held on to that hug a moment longer than usual. You look great, Dad, she whispered. So do you, sweetheart, I said. Fletcher realized at her shoulder. He looked at my outfit for a fraction of a second, controlled it immediately, and then produced the social smile. Leonard, glad you made it, he said, hand on my arm. Douglas just opened a really special Cabernet. Come on in. We moved to the dining room. The table was set with the deliberate formality of a table that has been set this way on purpose to make certain guests feel the architecture of the gap between themselves and their hosts. Crystal, heavy silverware, candles that had been purchased specifically for the occasion. I sat down, I unfolded my napkin, and then I did what I am very good at. I disappeared. Not because anyone made me, because I chose it. Douglas ran the dinner conversation, the way men like Douglas run all conversations, from the center, with authority, with the absolute unquestioned confidence of a man who has been the most important person in every room he has entered for 40 years. He spoke about a recent golf trip to Scotland. He spoke about the Atlanta commercial real estate market, with the cheerful authority of someone who follows it from the outside and believes that constitutes expertise. He talked about Fletcher. This young man, Douglas said at one point, gesturing at his son with his wine glass, has completely remade Meridian's regional operation. The numbers don't lie. That's leadership, pure and simple. You either have it or you don't. He works hard, I agreed. Beverly turned to Iris with a smile that had a specific shape. And you must feel so settled, having a husband who's really building something. It gives a family such a foundation. Not everyone is so fortunate. The table went quiet for the length of a breath. Iris smiled, gracious, steady. But I saw her hands in her lap. I picked up my water glass and said absolutely nothing, because the envelope hadn't come yet. And I knew, with the patience of a man who has spent 43 years learning when to wait, that it was coming. The moment arrived between the main course and dessert. I had been at that table for 2 hours. 2 hours of nodding. 2 hours of smiling at jokes that were less funny than their teller believed. 2 hours of asking polite questions I already knew the answers to, and complimenting a wine I had tasted better versions of, at a closing dinner in 2019 and not mentioned. I had worn the role of the sweet old man, Iris's retired dad, the fellow who drove the funny truck, as naturally as I wear anything. Not a single person at that table had looked at me with any suspicion that there might be something else underneath it. Then Douglas reached beneath his chair with the deliberate ease of a man who has been waiting to do this since we all sat down. He placed a document on the table. He smoothed it once with his palm, the way a man does when he wants you to register that what he is presenting has been prepared, considered, treated seriously. Then he slid it across to me. Leonard, he said, his voice dropping into the even register of a man who has prepared remarks. There's a matter we'd like to discuss as a family. I looked at the document. I did not touch it. Fletcher was sitting very straight, attempting to appear unconcerned about something he was very concerned about. Iris glanced at me once and then looked at her father-in-law. Her hands were not still. Fletcher has a vision, Douglas continued, a real one. His own development company, independent, built from his own foundation. We believe in him completely. What we need is startup capital. He nodded toward the document. What we're proposing is a straightforward arrangement. Iris's inheritance, used as collateral against an initial funding round. Fully above board, properly structured by our attorneys. We just need your blessing, Leonard. As her father. He leaned back slightly. Beverly nodded. Fletcher was looking at the table. I looked at Iris. Her face was very still in the way that faces go still when a person is trying to process several things at the same time, and has not yet decided which one to start with. I thought, you have no idea who you just handed that document to. I picked it up. I read every page, slowly, thoroughly, while the candles flickered and the clock on the wall counted out every second of silence. I read every paragraph, every figure, every clause. Nobody said a word. Douglas refilled his wine. Beverly adjusted her napkin. Fletcher was motionless in the way of a man waiting for a verdict. I finished reading. I closed it. I set it gently back on the table. I picked up my water glass, took a slow, unhurried sip, and looked at Douglas Callahan with the warmest expression I own. I appreciate the thought that went into this, I said. I'll review it carefully. Douglas exhaled. Fletcher's shoulders dropped just slightly. Beverly reached for her wine with the relieved energy of a woman who believes the difficult part is over. They thought they'd won. I finished my water. I made pleasant conversation for another 20 minutes, complimented Beverly on the meal, shook Douglas's hand at the door, firm, and let my eyes hold his for exactly 1 second longer than a social handshake requires. He didn't know what that second was for. I got in the truck. The young valet brought it around with the look of a man who has made a full and complete peace with the vehicle he is returning. I tipped him twice what he expected and watched his expression change entirely. I drove home through a quiet Atlanta night, and I was calm. Deeply, completely calm. The kind of calm that would concern people who knew what I was about to do. I said nothing for 12 days, not a word, not a reaction, not a single visible ripple. I filled the bird feeder on Sunday. I had coffee with Bud Kaminsky on Thursday afternoon. I went to church. I drove the F-150 to the hardware store and back. On day 6, Fletcher texted me. "Hey Leonard, hope you've had a chance to look things over. Pretty exciting opportunity. Let me know what you're thinking." I waited 4 hours. Then I replied, "Still working through it, things take time." He sent a thumbs up. I set the phone down and made a phone call. Not to Fletcher, not to Douglas. To the 3 senior members of the Meridian Properties Board of Directors. Men who had worked under my ownership for years. Men who understood that when I called directly, it was not a casual occasion. "I need a full operational audit," I said. "Scope. All executive-level activity, outside business interests, vendor contact use. Begin immediately." I hung up and went back to the yard. Here is what I knew that Fletcher did not know. That Douglas and Beverly, sitting in Buckhead that evening congratulating each other over a bottle of something expensive, did not know. I had written Fletcher's employment agreement personally. Every clause, every line, the way I write every senior agreement across every company I own, including one clause, buried toward the back, in the kind of careful legal language that most people skim because it looks like boilerplate and isn't. A fiduciary duty and non-compete clause, with a scope that covered exactly the kind of behavior I was about to ask an audit team to document. I had written that clause 17 years before Fletcher Callahan ever walked into a Meridian conference room. I had written it for men like him, specifically. The audit took 9 days. When the report arrived on my desk, I sat with it for a long time before I opened it. Not because I was uncertain about what it contained. I sat with it because I am 67 years old, and I have learned that the moment before something becomes irrevocable deserves at least a minute of stillness. Fletcher had been running a parallel operation for nearly a year. Preliminary client outreach using Meridian's internal contact database. Meetings arranged on company time, on company devices, with vendors and partners he had cultivated through his role at Meridian, all directed toward a private development venture he had been quietly building inside the infrastructure of the company he worked for. He had done it carefully, which I respected on a purely technical level. He had done it inside my house, which I did not. Everything the audit found was a direct, documented violation of the clause he had signed and not read carefully enough. I went to my closet on and put on the slate blue suit, pressed the night before. The good shoes. The watch I don't wear very often. I drove the F-150 to the Meridian offices and parked in the reserved space out front, the one with the small brass placard that reads, Voss Capital Group, reserved. The placard Fletcher had parked beside for 2.5 years without once asking whose name was on it. I walked into the building, rode the elevator to the executive floor, and sat down at the head of the conference table. Board members to my left, legal team to my right, audit findings in a folder in front of me. And 4 minutes later, Fletcher Callahan walked through that door. He was carrying his confidence the way he always carried it, natural, easy, fitted perfectly. He scanned the room and took in the board members, the legal team, the documents, and then his eyes found me at the head of his table, in a suit he had never seen me wear. I watched it happen, the understanding moving across his face in layers, floor by floor, like an elevator going down. The recruitment firm, the contract he had signed, the audit, the dinner table, the document he had slid across to me, every piece of the last 2.5 years arriving in this conference room on a Tuesday morning. The silence was 10 full seconds. I let every one of them land. "Sit down, Fletcher," I said quietly. He sat. "I'm going to say this once," I said, "not because I'm angry. I want you to be clear about that. I am not angry. I stopped being surprised by people like this a long time ago." I opened the folder. Meridian Property Partners is owned by Voss Capital Group. Voss Capital Group is mine, has been for 19 years. The company where you built your reputation, the salary that funds your mortgage, the vice president title you have been constructing your identity around, all of it exists on a foundation I built before you knew my name. I brought you in because your numbers were solid, and I believed you had the capacity to become something real. For the better part of a year, you used the resources I gave you to build something designed to run in direct competition with the company you swore a fiduciary duty to. I closed the folder. Everything the audit documented falls cleanly under the clause in your employment agreement. Our legal team is prepared to pursue this fully if necessary. He looked at the board. Neutral. He looked at the lawyers. Neutral. He looked back at me. And then he did something I had not anticipated. He didn't argue. He didn't calculate. He didn't try to find the angle. He just looked at me for a long moment, and then he looked down at the table, and I saw it clearly. Not the performance of a man managing a situation. Something real and quiet, the specific kind of shame that comes when a person sees themselves, finally and without any assistance, and recognizes the size of what they did. "I'll resign," he said, quietly, like it cost him something real to say it. "Good," I said. I stood. I buttoned my jacket. "One more thing," I said at the door. "The proposal Douglas brought to dinner, Iris's inheritance as collateral." I paused for 1 second. My attorneys transferred that inheritance directly into Iris's name this morning. Her account, her signature alone required, irrevocable. What Douglas drew up is a proposal about money that no longer sits where he believed it did. I let that settle. "Tell your parents dinner was excellent. Beverly makes a very good roast." I rode the elevator down. I got in the F-150. The engine did its thing. The defroster came on briefly, seemed to reconsider, shut itself off. The long scratch on the driver's panel caught the midday light as I pulled out of the parking structure and turned toward home. I drove back through Atlanta and I was quiet the whole way. 43 years of being the man people glanced at and moved past, and knowing the whole time, every single day, exactly who I was. I pulled into the driveway on Sycamore Hill and sat in the truck for a moment with the engine off. The oak tree in the backyard was bare now. The bird feeder was full. The house looked the same as it always looks. I went inside and called my daughter. She arrived 25 minutes later. I had tea ready at the kitchen table, 2 cups, the way my wife used to set it out on Sunday evenings before she passed. Iris sat down across from me and looked at my face with that careful, precise attention she has had since she was small, reading me like something she memorized a long time ago and hasn't forgotten. I told her everything, from the beginning, the structure of Voss Capital, Meridian, the recruitment process that brought Fletcher in, the employment clause I had written 17 years ago, the 5 months since the parking garage corridor, the audit, the conference room, the inheritance transfer, every piece of it laid out on the kitchen table between 2 cups of tea, as plainly and quietly as I could say it. When I finished, she was silent for a long time. The clock on the wall measured it. The bare tree in the backyard stood there in the late afternoon light. Then she looked up at me with her mother's eyes and asked the only question that mattered, the one I had been carrying the answer to since before she was born. "Dad," she said, "why didn't you ever tell me? Any of it?" I looked down at my cup. I looked out at the yard. Then I looked back at my daughter, at 36 years of her, at the girl who wrote a 2-page argument for staying up on New Year's Eve, at the woman who stood at a formal dinner table with her hands unsteady in her lap and did not flinch. "Because I wanted you to know yourself first," I said. "Before you knew what I had. I didn't want you spending your life measuring things against a number. I wanted you to know what you were worth before anyone told you what you were worth." She cried. I held her hand across the table and I let her, and I thought quietly about Douglas Callahan sitting in Buckhead, Beverly setting down her wine, Fletcher finding the words to explain to his parents how the old man in the ordinary clothes, the one with the funny truck and the drifted into whatever life, had turned out to be the one person at that table they should never, for a single moment, have looked past. I thought about all of that, and then I let it go. Because the only thing in the world that mattered to me right then was sitting across this table with her hands wrapped around a warm cup, and her eyes full and a small, surprised, real smile starting to find its way through. My daughter, the best thing I ever built, and the only one whose name I put on the door from the very first day. Some men don't announce themselves. They don't need to. And the ones who mistake that for weakness always find out, eventually, exactly what they were looking at the whole time.